Morning, everybody. We're going to be in Hosea chapter 5 tonight. All right. Before we get started, I have maybe some questions for all of you as far as this study is going. Feedback, how many of you guys are okay with the speed that we're going? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to speed up? Okay. I just want to make sure because sometimes some people have a hard time staying in one thing for too long. Go ahead.
I think that basically the book tells us how fast we should go, right? They're going through it. We may finish a chapter, we may not.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think that's basically what it is for most of the books.
Well, I know sometimes it can be difficult when a book is, 30 chapters. We're on this for 30 weeks. And I will tell you, I am working through these at breakneck speeds on the other end of it because typically preachers will spend a year or more on a book. I don't feel like that does anyone any favors, if I'm being honest. That's my views, but I wanted to get your guys' feedback on it. If you guys need something out of this that you're not getting, that I can try to provide that. Second, we are on chapter 5, right? There are 16 chapters. So that gives you plenty of time to give feedback on where you would like to go from here. If there's a book you would like to study through or a concept you'd like to look at. So if you have that feedback, please get it to me. For those of you that don't know my office hours, they are on the bulletin. If you don't know my number, it's on the bulletin. If you don't know my email, it's on the bulletin. So if you don't have my contact, you can, if you want to send me a note or send me a text or whatever, or come talk to me in person, anything is fine. But if you got suggestions on what you'd like to do, please let me know. All right, let's get into what we're here for. So it's been interesting that in Hosea so far we have so often when we do think of Hosea, we only remember that, well, he was forced to go marry this woman and she left him and went and slept with some people and he had to come get her again, and this was all an illustration, right? That is pretty much the summary that most people know of Hosea. But we've gone through 4 chapters so far. How many of them have actually addressed that situation? 2, right? 1 and 2? Are you telling me to check my time, or are you just tapping it? Okay. I say that's a quick Bible study, bro. I've been up here for like 2 minutes. So it's just more to point out that so often we think we remember things in the Old Testament, or we remember these big stories, or we mentioned a book. Well, we remember a concept in the book, the really noteworthy ones. But this is why it's so important to keep revisiting, right? Because if we only told the story of what Hosea went through, that would be much shorter than 16 chapters. I, for one, don't think God makes a habit of just handing us scripture that has no meaning. So clearly there's a lot of other important concepts in this. And this is why we go through it like we do, chapter by chapter. So verse 1, he's going to address Israel again. So if you're paying attention to this, we don't have one big long speech that Hosea is giving. What we have is several addresses that he makes to Israel, and they're broken up. How much time passes between addresses? No one knows. We have no idea, right? But we can make the mistake sometimes of thinking like this all happened in a day. But it doesn't quite seem like that's what's going on. It seems that he's talked to Israel. Nothing has changed for Israel. So then he's going to talk to them again. He says, "Hear this, O priests, pay attention, O house of Israel, give ear, O house of the king, for the judgment is for you. For you have been a snare at Mizpah and a net spread upon Tabor." So, a few things. Who specifically is he talking to here?
Priest and king.
Priest and king, right? Spiritual leaders, political leaders. Who remembers what Mizpah is? AJ? You're a teacher, Carlene. What is it?
I said, isn't it a mountain?
It is. What's important about it?
Is it the one, I mean, is it what they call the Dublin, the one where Moses went up to get the tablet?
No.
See, I didn't know. I told you I didn't know.
That's all right. I don't know is a valid
I
answer.
don't know.
Wasn't the place that was famous for worshiping the false god?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe 1 Samuel is where we'll see mention of this. That's what's happening here. The reason we're supposed to know the name is because that's the story that takes place in Samuel. It was. I really wish I was better with names. God protected one of the patriarchs on this mount. I apologize. I'm showing myself a fool because I cannot remember his name now. And then we also have on Mount Mizpah, basically agreements. People would collectively go there to covenant. Sorry, struggling to remember the name. It was a place that was frequently used to make covenants because to make covenants. People would often travel there when they wanted to make a covenant. It wasn't necessary, but it was a pretty common practice, and that was because of the patriarchs that had worshipped on that mount. It kind of became a sacred site, if you will. Tabor is found in Judges chapter 4. And you're going to have the story of Bakar. I think I'm saying that right. So obviously we don't need a historical account of these locations so much as I just want to point out he's not naming meaningless places. These places had a very deep spiritual meaning for the Israel people. So when we look at, so when we're looking at this one verse, and there's way more said in it than you would normally think of, but he's essentially telling them that this judgment that's coming on Israel, it's because of the leadership. It can be difficult sometimes because we don't talk like this, right? But when he says the judgment is for you, he's saying this is happening because of you. It's not the judgment is only going to occur on them. The judgment is happening because of that. So this is the danger of leadership, right? Because if leadership leads their people astray, they actually have the ability, and this is just the Bible, okay? So don't take this and apply it to something I'm not talking about. although I'm sure you could, but I'm not talking about anything else. But from a spiritual perspective, leaders have the ability to bring condemnation and judgment upon the people that follow them. That's a pretty big weight, right? And so it's not something to take lightly. You have Hosea has just in 2 chapters now, he's told Israel, you are going to be wiped out. You're going to be wiped out because you know nothing about God. You've completely strayed away from him. And he starts this out and says, and it's because of you guys. It's because of you spiritual leaders. It's because of you political leaders that Israel's in this state, that they are so separated from God. And the judgment comes upon all of Israel. But you guys need to know that this is your fault. Now, this can be difficult sometimes when we back off of it because, well, isn't each person responsible for their decisions? So why should a leader be condemned or held responsible for the condemnation of others when they're the ones that chose to follow them in the first place? Shouldn't each man be responsible for his own condemnation?
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure? Well, that's how you get them to follow you.
And that's why they were also condemned.
Yeah.
Who put him in power in the first place?
Thank you for saying that, because that Mizpah is where Saul is put in place, is selected as a king.
Yeah, that's right.
I know that was not what you were saying, but the way you said that reminded me of what I couldn't remember. Yeah, that was where Saul was selected as a king. So who put them in charge would have been God, right? And that happened back when he selected the Levites as the priest tribe, and it would have been also because every king pretty much that came after Saul was specifically chosen by God. And so the political and spiritual leaders would have been chosen by God. So how does that happen? If God chose these leaders, why would he choose leaders that were going to lead the people astray?
I wonder, I'm just throwing this out there, if that doesn't show us that we look to man for leading us, and how easily they can lead us in the wrong way. And that puts the dependence on trusting in God.
Yeah, I think you've really hit this on the head, actually. I think what this shows us is, as a leader, yeah, you're going to be held responsible for the actions of those who follow you because you've led them there. I see it, Gilbert. Just give me a second. But at the same time, right, God is not going to allow you to point the finger at the leaders and say, well, but they told me to. This isn't mine. You put them in charge, so surely that's what you wanted me to do, right? Because that's where the human mind, that's that rational excuse that we would make, right? God put them in that position, so clearly they're leading us where God wanted us led. But each man is responsible for his decisions. Each man is going to be responsible for his actions, regardless of what the leaders do. But the leaders are still responsible for where they lead. Go ahead, Gilbert.
Isn't this series of passages supposed to lower our pride and make it clear? It seems to me it's clear that God is telling us through these passages that power corrupts, so that even if it was the very best leader, that even that doesn't make him God. It just makes it more important for the people who are the sheep to be more careful because power corrupts. Isn't this a kind of a teaching tool that he uses, these series of situations about being defiled because you're not paying attention to the fact that the normal human king is going to be, as he gains power, it gets closer and closer to falling and being corrupted. And so that makes it important for you to listen to me and to follow me. Do you see that in that?
Yeah. I'm going to say something, and if that's not what you mean, go ahead and correct me, okay? Essentially, what is revealed to us is that the people are guilty because they listen to the the worldly leaders over God. Regardless of whether God gave them that position or not, they have allowed those leaders to supersede the position of God in their lives. And they use the excuse, well, but we didn't put them there. But at the end of the day, right, God must always come before. God must always have more power. We'll make this in a way that we can understand in our society, right? So you have, hopefully I don't cause any, you have state power and federal power, right? And the idea is there's certain things that are relegated to the federal government, that it is their decision to make. There are certain things that are left that are fully in the state's control. And then there's this third area that laws in fact, most laws end up falling under, where essentially it's not really assigned to either one. Okay? And that's the area I want to talk about. So in our society, what happens when the law does not decide that this is the federal government's job or the state government's job? Who does it go to? The state. Yep. The default is the law is decided by the state. But the federal government has the ability to come and override that state. Right? So ultimately, it's the federal government's responsibility. I mean, it's their choice. They can just choose to abstain, really. So this is essentially how we can understand leadership and God. Right? We follow the leaders, the people that God puts in charge, whether we're talking about spiritual leaders like our elders or society leaders like our politicians. It doesn't really matter, right? If we believe that they were put there by God, then that puts us right back into this same relationship. That means they have the ability, they have the right to decide certain things because of their position. There are certain things that are just automatically their choice. How much they're going to tax you is the politician's job, right? God could override that, right? I mean, we can all agree if God decided that he wanted to take control of the taxes, he could, right? Amen. But he's not going to, because it's beneath it. It's not worth his notice. It's not what he's concerned about. So he's going to allow his world leaders to make that decision. What happens when a worldly leader, what happens when that leader goes directly against God's wishes or God's instruction? Same thing that happens when a state goes against the federal government, right? Federal government comes in, lays down the hammer, and says, no, this is my game, I'm the one in charge, and I'm decided that this is how it's going to be. You're going to submit. And that's exactly how it's supposed to work. It often doesn't. But in the relationship between God and man, we are to submit to the leaders that he's placed before us. But we are not to submit to them to the extent that they overrule God. Does that make sense? I know that was a really long discourse for something that really shouldn't be that complicated. But you would be surprised as to how many people struggle to grasp the concept. So, hopefully that lined up with your understanding, Gilbert. Gilbert. Okay. I didn't know if you heard me or not. All right, so let's move into Verse 2 says, and the revolters have gone deep into slaughter, but I will discipline all of them. I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you have played the whore. Israel is defiled. Their deeds do not permit them to return to their God. For the spirit of whoredom is within them, and they know not the Lord. All right. And I know I try not to stop this frequently, but there's just a lot in this chapter. So, does anyone want to comment on verse 4? I know it's a very vague thing, but I don't want to spoon feed you tonight.
There's a point when your evil actions make God just say, I don't care. Go away. Don't pray to me, don't talk to me. I'm not going to listen.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Sometimes the worldly temptations are so comfortable or so exhilarating to feel good about it that you fail to see the harm or the disobedience.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Well, what it literally says is they were unable. I think you're right. They didn't want to, but yeah. Yep. But in this verse, he actually says they're incapable. How do we relate to that? Because we've already talked about that it's never impossible.
To us. But we're under a different law than they were.
So was there a point to where they could sin so much that God would not allow them to make sacrifice and be redeemed?
Them or us?
Them, in the Old Testament.
Yes, there was a point.
What was that point?
I can't give you, it was, like the 3rd of May, I can't give you an exact one. It was a point when they just got to the point where they refused to turn to God, and he refused to accept them if they wanted to. He knew they wouldn't, but he refused.
How many laws resulted in the death penalty under the Old Testament?
How many laws? Most
Yeah.
of them.
Not really. There was only a couple. We often think that because there are some, and it sticks in our minds. But there was only a few sins that were to be immediately punished by death. You had sexual immorality, and you had murder. And those were pretty much it. There are other sins. The cost was you went and made sacrifice at the temple or tabernacle. And that was essentially supposed to be a placeholder for that sin. And then you have the scapegoat once a year where the high priest would lay the sins of Israel on a goat and send them off into the wilderness. Okay? Now this didn't delete the sin, but it did remove it from the people. So to speak. That was the idea behind it anyways.
What's the one that got Jesus killed?
Which sin got Jesus killed?
That's not right. What's the one they said that he did that would have had him put to death?
It would have been blasphemy. Yep.
That wasn't a race.
But that was,
I was going to say all of them, man.
that was a sin under, you That's
Yeah.
in the Old Testament.
Yep. You're right. I listed two. I know that I don't have them all off the top of my head.
Sure.
My point was not all the sins, but there was many sins that didn't immediately result in execution. So even Israel, even under the Old Testament, God provided a way for them to come back. I mean, that's always been in his plan. I want you to consider this. And I think that the key to understanding this idea of them not being permitted is the last part of verse 4. He says, "For the spirit of whoredom is within them, and they know not the Lord." So you have two problems here. You don't know God, right? Even if you know his name or know of him, you don't know him. And second, you've given yourself over to worshiping other things. So here's the problem. When you put something or someone in position of God, it is really difficult to come to know God because there's nowhere left for him. God, by his very nature, does not share space. You cannot have God come onto a pedestal you already have something on. There's no room for it. So if this spirit of whoredom, and if we're understanding the spiritual inclination of that word, we're talking about idolatry, right? That's essentially what sin he's addressing with that word. You've basically cheated on God with these other deities. How do you come to repent and worship God when you believe that there are these other gods that you're supposed to worship? Because God does not allow you to do both. So I think this is them worshiping these gods have put them in a position where they're not even capable of coming to God. Because God can't share space with what they're doing. Does that make sense? The reason I'm taking time on this is not just because it's the main idea of Hosea, but because we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about the concept of allowing things to take the place of God in our lives. I've heard youth ministers and preachers, and they talk about, oh yeah, you worship money and you worship things. It goes so much deeper than that. This is the problem with trying to fight a spiritual battle, is because Satan doesn't. The forces of darkness do not fight you head to head. They're not going to fight like some honorable army, right? It's devious. You will be convinced you're doing the right thing the whole time. How many people believe that having a crucifix gives them protection or power? That's a commonly held belief in a huge portion of the world. But what is a crucifix?
It's an idol.
It's a graven image.
Yeah.
I mean, even apart from being an idol, it's a graven image is biblically is defined as any carved image of something that is in heaven. Either you believe that Jesus never went to heaven, or that's a carved image of him. So the issue is with this crucifix is just an example, but there are many times where we think we're doing the right thing, we think we're doing good things, we think this is of God, and many people won't find out until it's far too late that they had allowed things to creep in and take God's place. How many people worship love, the idea of love, to such an extent that God has been removed from the idea of it? This is the difficult thing, because God is love. We know, but what that phrase actually means is that we understand love by the character of God. But people are so enamored by the concept of love that they will actually worship it. Now, if you think that, I don't know what I'm talking, okay, how many deities in the pantheons of human history have had a goddess of love? Rome and Greece had two. Outside of that, you come into modern language. People are so confused by what love is supposed to look like and so enamored with the concept of it that they will convince themselves that love is all these things that it was never supposed to be. Right? You have people that think that, well, if I feel affectionate, that's love. Right? You believe that you can be in a loving homosexual relationship. The problem is you actually can't. You can't. The character of God is what defines love. That is not of God, so that can't be one and the same. You can have an affectionate relationship. You can have a self-fulfilling relationship, but you can't have a loving relationship. Go ahead.
What's hanging around your neck?
A cross.
I'm not picking, I'm just asking, what's the purpose?
What's the purpose? It's decoration.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a valid question. Obviously, I said some things that would make that a relevant question, right? But I definitely don't teach things that I don't believe. For me, wearing this, it just looks nice, and it was a gift from a friend. But it doesn't have any spiritual impact. I don't believe that I'm closer to God because I wear it. I don't allow it to take place of me talking to people about Jesus. Right? I don't wear it and then be like, well, see, now I'm good. Everyone knows I'm a Christian because I'm wearing this. Right? So, yes, I'm wearing it. Now, I talked about graven image. There's a difference between a cross and a crucifix. Jesus isn't on this. Right? So that'd be why it's separated from that idea of graven images, because the cross isn't in heaven. It never was.
How many non-Christians do you see wear a cross?
Oh, a lot of them. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it depends on how you define a Christian, really. But yeah, no, there's a lot of people that wear crosses because they think they look nice. Or because they think it'll give them an easy pass with people. I don't know. All right, so I talked about how we worship love, or how secular people worship love to the point of idolatry. What about in the church? What does that look like? When I say people have a tendency to make the idea of love an idol, what do you think that might look like in a church? How many times have you seen people tolerate things that they shouldn't tolerate because, well, I gotta be nice, because I'm supposed to be loving towards them, so I can't say things that will hurt them or make them feel guilty or make them feel shame. How many times in the church have people, and for those of you that this affects, I want you to listen closely to the words because you already know what I believe about it. How many times do we witness people who have been Christians their whole lives, and preachers are very guilty of this, divorce their wives and marry somebody else in the church? Isn't that making love an idol? Because you talk to them and you get the same answer from all of them. Well, I fell out of love and I fell in love. Isn't that allowing that your understanding of love to replace God and to dictate your decisions in life? This is what I'm talking about. Which one of those sins will put you at odds with God? Both of them, right? So the reason I point this out is because we fool ourselves sometimes in thinking that these are not issues for us, but they happen all the time. They happen all the time. We trick ourselves into believing that we're here for a reason that we're not actually here for. We trick ourselves and excuse ourselves from doing things we ought to do or not doing the things we should do. We trick ourselves because what? We allow things to replace God in our lives and we don't even realize we're doing it. How many times have you seen somebody in the church acting self-serving? I can tell you, I certainly haven't been preaching for decades. So when I say this, I'm not trying to be, act like I've been a preacher my whole life. But I have been at enough churches to see, I've seen many deacons who have wanted and taken a deacon position because they believed it elevated them in the respect or in the eyes of man. I have seen many elders fight to gain eldership so that they can gain other people's respect and so that their understanding of what is right and wrong can be enforced. Now, you might be asking, Nathan, how do you relate this title? Very simply, you put yourself on God's pedestal. You've come to church and claimed that you've given your life to the Lord, and then you have acted in a way that is completely self-serving. Now, I'm not saying any of this because it directly relates to anybody here. I'm saying this because we need to be aware. Because even if that sin isn't in this room, there is no way for us to protect ourselves if we aren't aware that it's possible. Does that make sense? There is a point where we need to be on guard from allowing sin into our body. And that means being aware when things are happening that shouldn't happen. That means being aware of the nature of sin. People aren't guilty of idolatry only because they got on their knees and bowed down to a stick, as Hosea puts it. Idolatry looks like many, many things. And it's anything that allows something to take the place of God. All right, off my soapbox. I want to move into verse 5 because Dan already mentioned it. The pride of Israel testifies to his face. Israel and Ephraim shall stumble in his guilt. Judah also shall stumble with them. With their flocks and herds they shall go to seek the Lord, but they will not find him. He is withdrawn from them. They have dealt faithlessly with the Lord, for they have borne alien children. Now the new moon shall devour them with their fields. This starting to sound like cryptic to anyone? That was at least my thought reading through this chapter. I'm like, man, some of this you really got to stop and look at. That's why we're stopping so frequently tonight. So who wants to take this next part? The pride of Israel testifies to his face. Israel and Ephraim shall stumble in his guilt. Judah also shall stumble with them. With their flocks and herds they shall go to seek the Lord, but they will not find him. He is withdrawn from them.
The pride of Israel and the pride of Judah was God, Jehovah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to testify personally against them. And since he's the judge, they have no recourse. The judge says, you're guilty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what he's literally illustrating is this idea that God is going to testify to God about what's going on.
Yeah. Because there was no one greater to whom God swore by himself.
And because not only is he a judge, he's a first-hand witness, isn't he?
Yeah.
Blow the horn in Gibeah, the trumpet in Ramah, sound the alarm at Bethaven. We follow you, O Benjamin. Ephraim shall become a desolation in the day of punishment among the tribes of Israel. I make known what is sure. The princes of Judah have become like those who move the landmark. Upon them I will pour out my wrath like water. Ephraim is oppressed, crushed in judgment, because he was determined to go after filth. But I am like a moth to Ephraim, and like dry rot to the house of Judah. When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his wound, then Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to the great king, but he is not able to cure you or heal your wound. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. I will tear and go away. I will carry off, and no one shall rescue. All right. I will return again to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face, and in their distress earnestly seek me. All right. So I want to go up to verse 13. He says, and then Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to the great king, but he is not able to cure you or heal your wound. All right. So, history buff. What is this talking about from a historical standpoint? It's not, right?
Well, they begged the king of Assyria to let them go back to behave. Let me good, let me go home, let me go home.
Well, they did that at one point, but this has to do with the punishment up above. And it's not just that they asked them, Assyria, to allow them to return. They asked Assyria to help them because they were dying. He's made their lands desolate. Israel spent a period of time before Assyria invaded them in a pretty bad famine, which lines up with God's judgment on Israel. So what we don't often realize is that Israel actually sent messengers to Assyria asking for help because they were dying, because they were starving, they weren't reproducing. God had essentially just shut everything down. And Assyria turned them away. The problem is, and this is outside of Bible knowledge and just studying history and the Assyrians' account of that same time period, that was actually why they invaded. Because they sent messengers telling this king, we are defenseless right now. We're starving. We don't have, our population is diminishing. Our people are getting sick. Can you please help us? And he's like, no, take your problems back to your land. And then realized, well, they just told me they were ripe for the picking. That was actually when Assyria invaded. Now, Sam is actually right. Israel continues begging that king for help, even after taking them captive. And this is what I believe that he's pointing out in 14 and 15. It doesn't matter how many times you go to him, I have decided that judgment is upon you, and there is no help to be had. Now, I wouldn't be me if I didn't insist that there was modern day practical application, right? We make the mistake of believing that man can fix this. Let me start out by asking a question. Who can tell me what's wrong with today's society?
Oh, I can.
Name one.
It's made up of people.
Yeah, people tend to be horrible. Who else can tell me what's wrong with society?
People are too judgmental.
Judgmental? What else? Well, I know you guys feel stronger about things than this.
People are
Rude? What else? Oh, come on.
There's nothing wrong with me, it's all you guys.
Yeah.
Y'all think that abortion is okay?
No.
Would you agree that that's something wrong in our society?
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys know there's something wrong with our society. Come on, I'm trying to get you involved
It's
here.
made up of people. That's the
Give me details, Sam.
no mercy, no love, no care, no concern,
Mhm.
vengeance, viciousness, acts of violence.
Okay,
The problem is, we are society.
Yeah,
let me put this a different way then. Who can name some cultural, physical problems, material problems, mundane human problems in our society? I'm talking things like abortion,
prices are too
things
high.
like murder,
Yeah,
inflation.
right.
How many of you guys are okay with illegal immigrants? Gun control, right? I know I'm usually the guy that says, let's not get into politics. Bear with me, I'm not actually getting into politics. All the reasons that you voted for whoever you voted for is because you saw problems in society, right? Okay. So I'm just going into that because I want you to be in the right mindset for what I'm going to say. Those problems have been in society since there was a society on earth.
Amen.
No man, whether you believe earth is 6,000 or 4 billion years, I don't care. No man in human history has ever fixed those problems. Do you really believe that somehow we have evolved so much that we've produced one now? Now, not getting into this whole like, oh, this guy, I'm not giving support to the president. We're not getting into that. I'm telling you, no matter who the president is, they're not going to fix these problems. And do you know why?
Here's the problem.
Because the problems are based in spirituality. Man is not going to fix our world. Our world was broken the minute man decided that they superseded God. The world will continue to be broken. Understand this. Revelation tells us this world will never not be broken. Ever. Our hope is not one day it heals or is fixed. Our hope is that when God makes a new earth and a new heaven, that we will be permitted. Because he's going to destroy this one. There is no promise that this world is ever going to get fixed. Now, I say these things not to devoid us of responsibility in our society. We're to do good things. We are to be the epitome of goodness to man. But be careful how much faith you're putting in man. They've never resolved these issues before. And I'm telling you, there is no reason to believe they're going to get resolved. Ever. Until God finally comes and says, I'm taking over now.
Well, he did that with Noah. But
Yeah.
all but 8 people.
And what did he promise Noah? The rainbow, right? He says, I will never again flood the earth by water. And then he says, fire maybe. I just wanted to point out tonight, and if you've been paying attention, I obviously did not plan where we're at, right? We started on the book when I was told to start on it, and this is where we landed. So I think it's pretty telling that it's around election that this happened. I just want to caution us not to put our trust in men to fix the problems of man, because they've never done it. It's not to say some leaders can't do a better job than others, right? First part of this chapter, what did it tell us? That the leaders were condemned because they led people in the wrong direction. That's important. That means that some leaders won't. Right? it's good for you to assess those who are leading you, whether that's elders, whether that's senators, president, I don't care. Maybe it's your boss, whoever's in charge of leading you, you need to assess where they're leading you and decide if you can follow or not. And that's all great. You should do that. You need to do that. But don't make the mistake of thinking they're going to make the world perfect. Don't make the mistake of thinking that they're going to rid you of all of your woes. Don't make the mistake of thinking they can fix what's wrong in society or in your life. There is only one person in all of existence that has that kind of power and has ever even promised that. There is a reason why God is God no matter what. There is a reason why putting people in place of God is so problematic. If you want your life to be better, then you go and follow the best. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you want your life to be filled with goodness, you go and follow the guy that says, I'm going to bring you to me and I am the epitome of goodness. You want your life to be full of love, you go and follow the guy that says, I am love. Right? God needs to stay in God's place. It is our responsibility as Christians to remember that. Always. Leaders of man will do good things and they will do horrible things. And I pray for them as much as anyone else, believe it or not, as much as I tend to be calloused about it, I pray for them just as much as anybody. But don't be deluded here, guys. It doesn't matter who the president is. There are still going to be problems. And those problems are going to continue being problems until everyone is a follower of God. And even then, we're still going to have some problems. So,
It's like I told this gentleman the other day in the restaurant. We got up, and he got up, and come over and shook my hand because we say prayer before we go. And I thought that was just great to see your faith in action. And then he wanted to start talking about the election. You know, God's in control. No matter who's president, no matter who's in charge or what, God's in control.
amen. Yeah. And all we're saying here tonight is it's our job to remember that. Because spiritual warfare is not Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae. Spiritual warfare does not look like the Revolutionary War and you have Americans and you have the British all lined up in a nice orderly line shooting at each other. Spiritual warfare is standing in the gap. To quote Ezekiel, it is standing in the gap so that the land does not have to face God's wrath. Spiritual warfare means you stand on the battlements and you watch for the threats. This is just simply a warning to not blind yourself to them. Sin is always going to be a problem for us, but we need to be on our guard. Last comments, questions, interactions. All right, let's go to God in prayer. Father, tonight we thank you for being our God, for promising to allow us to be your people. We thank you for loving us through our flaws. We thank you for loving us through our rebellious nature. We thank you for showing us perfection, an example for us to strive for. We even thank you for those who are not believers. We We thank you for those in the world that provide us an opportunity to share the good news. We thank you for spiritual healing, for enlightenment. We thank you for instruction and correction. And we thank you for Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everybody.